when I got to The Simpsons, I had just been a pure sketch writer and was, young in my 20s and was only interested in something being really funny. And when people talked about character development and you need to care about these people, I thought it was bullshit. I just thought, I just want to think of the best Mr. Burns joke. I want to think of the best Homer joke. I want to think of the best. And it was Jim Brooks who really impressed on us that I know it's a cartoon, but this is a family and you have to believe that they love each other and that they're connected. And when I first heard it, I thought, what are you talking about? We don't need that. Do we really need to do that? And I realized, the show's been on for, I think, 110 years now. And yes, the jokes are there, but people also believe in this family in a crazy way, even though it's a cartoon. And that, to me, is something that's all through your book, respecting these characters. And I think this comes from your theater background and understanding that people need to be invested. They won't come back week after week just for jokes. Jokes are great, but they have to be rooted in who the character is. And, I go back sometimes and look at a Mayberry, Andy Griffith show, and I look at the interplay between Andy Griffith and Don Knotts and think this is just pure, beautiful, character comedy. Sometimes there isn't necessarily a joke. You're just laughing at the fact that these two people are so different and we're watching them interact, and you also know that they care about each other. And I understand that now at my late age much better than I did when I was a kid, that is what supports the whole thing.
Yeah, the audience has to be invested in the characters. You have to give them, you have to give them something underneath that grounds the characters. And, with Cheers, we made Sam an ex-alcoholic because that gave him, although he's a stud and wants to go to bed with every woman, he's still underneath. There's a kind of sadness to him.
And he blew his career. Blew up.
So that's important. That's what grounds them. That's where audiences identify with them. With every character, Louis De Palma, you identify with him by his lot in life, by how he looks. He's angry, but you attribute it to the hand he was dealt. The same with Carla. With Diane, even with Diane, you still. She wanted to be a professor, but she was never going to be a professor. She was going to be a waitress. And so that's what, because real people identify with that.
It's interesting because in the book you point out, and I hadn't thought about this either, which is that and I thought it was fascinating that in your guys' opinion, all of these characters have these flaws, have these inner conflicts. They're constantly being broken. They're constantly being put back together again, except for one, Norm. and you say Norm is just the one truly centered, happy character who kind of anchors the whole thing. And I thought, oh yeah, I see that now. That I hadn't thought of it quite that way.
Yeah, he's happy just sitting on a bar stool, saying one more for the road and never leaving. In fact, the only time we addressed designated driving was in the pilot episode when Coach drives Norm home because he's been there too long. But we never did it again. Norm is a character that everybody knows.
Yeah,
I had a Norm at the Allstate Bar in New York City. There was a guy who sat at the end of the bar and literally said, "One more and I'm out of here." And at the end of the evening, he was still there, and everybody knows Norm.
There's great some of the dialogue that you reprint in here is, I said so great, but just I was reading through all these Norm lines, and they are so so fantastic. And there's one where I think Sam's closing up and Norm just says, wow, 17 and a half hours just flew by. But there's so many great pages of Norm lines in here that are fantastic.
It saves me writing. So,
hey, I noticed that.
Yeah, but
the Writers Guild wants to talk to you, by the way.
The evolution of the normism, I talk about in the book. The evolution of the normism is that in the pilot, in front of the pilot audience, when Norm entered and says, "Afternoon, everybody," and everybody says Norm, because that was from Nicky Colasanto had a bar. He was from Rhode Island, and in Providence, he had a bar where everybody screamed his name when he walked in.
Right.
And Sam said, "What do you know?" And Norm says, "Not enough." And that was not written as a joke. That was not written as a joke.
Right.
And when the audience roared at that line, I looked at Glenn, and I looked at Glenn Charles, and I said, and I looked at him with the look of saying, "Oh my God, they're laughing at a character."
Yeah.
This roly-poly guy saying not enough. If you had another guy coming in doing it, it would not have been the same as George doing it.
Right.
And so it became incumbent upon us every time he entered to do a joke. There were so many of them, like, Sam, pour me a beer. It's 9 a.m. Float a cornflake in it.
Oh, there was this scene that I always remembered, and I was so glad you reprinted it in here, where a little boy comes into the bar.
That's in the pilot.
It's in the pilot.
That's a teaser.
God, the boy comes in, "How about a beer, Chief?" And Sam says, "How about an ID?" And the kid says, "An ID? That's very flattering. Wait till I tell the missus." And Sam looks at the ID and he goes, military ID, First Sergeant Walter Keller, born 1944. That makes you 38. Must have fought in Vietnam. Boy says, "Oh, yeah." Sam says, "What was it like?" Boy, "Gross." Sam, "Yep, that's what they say. War is gross." And then he says, "I'm sorry, soldier." And the boy goes, "This is the thanks we get." I mean, that's the best. That's just a best TV writing imaginable.
That's how the pilot opened.
Yeah, it's so great. I mean,
it was originally later on in the show, but we moved it up, and we could do a tag or a teaser. So a teaser's before the show, tags at the end of the show. So we moved it up to be the teaser, and it was. John Navin was the kid's name. I'll never forget it. Mm-hmm. And Teddy was so great in that scene.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't mean. He was sweet with the kid, tolerant, and it just set that character.
He's yes-anding the whole time. He's saying, okay, well, let's take a look. Very good. First Sergeant. All right.